Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to our ninth J-Chat from the Florida Young Birders Club. Today is May 20th, and here are a few little reminders before we start our meeting. We are going to mute everyone before the presentation. You'll have access to your microphones and chat during the Q&A, and then just make sure that whenever you're interacting with anybody, or just be respectful, please. So now, without further ado, today we have Gina Kent with us. Gina has done amazing work with swallow-tailed kites, short-tailed hawks, and tons of other really, really cool birds. She has worked with things like birds, invasive plants, and amazing places like New Mexico and Australia, and just incredible. She's received her master's at Georgia Southern University by conducting research on swallow-tailed kites. And she's worked with ARCI since 2000, where we had Ken Meyer, who also is with them, come and talk to us earlier this year. And she now works as the senior conservation scientist. So, Gina, if you're all ready, I can hand it over to you and you can start sharing your screen and give us your amazing presentation.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thanks for spending your Saturday afternoon with me and swallow-tailed kites. All right, so you've given me permission to share. Good. Okay. Select a window. This should be it. Allow. All right. And into. Okay. Everybody see a beautiful picture of a swallow-tailed kite?
Yes.
Good. All right. I'll get started then. So as Blair said, I work with ARCI, and I think you saw Ken Meyer's presentation a bit ago, but I'm going to focus on one of our favorite species, the species that probably we've been working on the longest, and that is the swallow-tailed kite. And swallow-tailed kites are really cool in so many different ways. Not only is it the most beautiful raptor, of course, here, but it is a neotropical migrant. So it goes to South America for the winter and actually spends more of its time on the wing, on migration and in South America than it does on the breeding grounds here in the United States. But what also makes these guys really neat is that they're social. If you think about ospreys or red-shouldered hawks or some other kind of raptor, they're really territorial and, don't gather in groups, but swallow-tailed kites live amongst each other and use each other for safety and to find food sources and safe places to nest and breed. And I'm going to talk about all of those things. So let's get ahead and get started. Swallow-tailed kites used to breed all the way up the Mississippi River, all the way into Minnesota and parts of Wisconsin and Illinois. But due to logging and some human persecution, even some, they were shot at, their eggs were collected, their breeding range really shrunk down to portions of 7 states in the Southeast. And Florida is the most important state for swallow-tailed kites. We have about 3/4 of the US population living here. So some of the things that make them communal is they gather in foraging groups, which we call foraging aggregations, where they feed together. They'll nest in what we call loose neighborhoods. So a neighborhood could be about a mile apart, but also like as close as 30 or 50 meters. I've seen kite nests that close to each other. And of course, within these little loose neighborhoods, you get neighborhood roosts. So birds that aren't incubating or brooding chicks at night would all gather in a tree for safety together in a communal area. And then this expands out to pre-migratory roosts and winter roosts. So when they are finding places to feed and and sleep during their whole annual cycle. They're finding each other to have safe places to sleep and eat together. So let's go into these things. First of all, swallow-tailed kites mostly eat insects. The adults spend all their day on the wing, flying around and finding ephemeral groups of bugs. So bugs that are like a hatch of, say, a beetle or locusts or dragonflies. And, you know, they've said that the black and white plumage of birds helps to be more visual. So birds from far away can see each other. So if a passing kite sees a bunch of other swallowtails far off in the distance, that black and white pattern helps them find each other and then find these food or roost sites. So you can find really big groups of up to hundreds of birds, swallowtail kites, just feeding quietly over insect fields. So keep an eye out in late June through early August. The kites often like to go in fallow fields and fallow watermelon fields that have a lot of bugs that are eating the watermelon. And there's some places up in north central Florida that have these big watermelon fields that the kites are gathering in to feed on the insects. And this is right at the end of the breeding season. So the young birds are coming here for the first time. And the adults, they're all feeding to put on fat and wait for their big migration coming up. So swallowtail kites like to nest in really tall trees that emerge from the canopy, and they find each other in these little neighborhood areas. I say neighborhood just because they're close by each other. So they can alert each other for predators, and then also find these safe places to sleep and feed together. So this is a picture of a timber forest, working timber. So like where they're doing forestry practices. There looks like there was a clear cut down between the bigger trees here where there's planted pine. And these are really good places for kites to nest. They can feed in those lower areas where the insects and even other things like arboreal snakes and tree frogs and even nestling birds are easily accessible on the edges, so they can gather food for their nestlings while they are finding high, tall trees along the edges where they can put their nests. They build their nests with a lot of Spanish moss. So in the tops of these tall pines and often cypress trees, they'll use any kind of tree for nesting, but it's really going to be the tippy top area of the tree that opens up to allow the kite to fly in and out really easily. Those long wings and tail get them, they need space to get in and out of their nest. So they choose those tall trees, and then they choose a lot of Spanish moss because their feet are tiny and they can't pick up those big sticks like you'd see an eagle, osprey, even a red shoulder that would kind of make this matrix of big sticks. So they hold together the smaller sticks with Spanish moss, and frankly, it's got to be a lot more comfortable too. Check out these two little nestlings, which are probably about 15 to 17 days old. And you see the adult coming in with a tree frog. So Max Stone was a wonderful photographer that worked with us, taking some great photos. And I appreciate him letting us use his pictures here. So this kite's nesting in the top of a pine tree, lots of Spanish moss up there. So everybody loves baby kites, right? So I have a quick little video of two chicks who are probably about 10 to 12 days old. And look at the direction they're facing. So off to the left, you will see an adult come in with some food. See if you can tell what that food item is. And then very shortly after that, there's going to be an adult that comes over on the right side. And that's the female. So the male comes in with the food first, and then the female comes in to see if it's a big thing that she might need to tear up if the chicks can't eat it. So let's check what's going on here. Chicks are getting excited. Here he comes. What's he got? I think I saw green legs. Oh, and there's the female. She also has a bite. This is a beetle, or no, it's a big tabanid's fly. So a big horse fly. That little chick's not that excited about horsefly today, but he'll just have a bite. The only reason why I know it's male or female is behavior. They're very hard to tell. There's a little size difference. So the females are a slightly bigger, but really when we capture birds to do telemetry and put radio transmitters on, we take a feather sample and we can send that into a lab to get a DNA answer if they're males or female. So super cute chicks there. All right, because the birds nest in neighborhoods and are socially attracted to each other, we have done an experiment where we use these decoys. So this was a crow and we painted it lovely white. We cut off the bill, made kind of a angular bill. And then look at that, we added tail extensions to add that swallowtail. And we've been putting these in places to see if we could entice the kites to come in and either roost or nest near the decoys. So the idea is, because we know we've been working in these working forests that there's timber harvest, so they have to cut trees. If we can entice the kites to move to different areas because they are social, and if they see other kites, meaning these decoy kites, in a place where we would like them to be, because we know that forest is not going to be cut anytime soon. We were trying to see if we could influence where they were nesting. And the other thing we were doing is putting up, I'm stuck here. What's going on? There we go. Nest platforms. So this looks so much like a swallow-tailed kite nest, but it's actually something that I made. So I start with like a plastic chicken wire, and I weave cypress and oak branches through the mesh, and then I cover it with Spanish moss. And then I pick what I think is an open, suitable tree up above the canopy, like you would see a swallow-tailed kite nest. And I'm a climber, and I can get up there and then hoist up the materials and make something that looks like a swallow-tailed kite nest. And happy to tell you that we've had some success. We've had birds nest on these platforms, so they've added their own materials. And then we've also had birds nest very close to these platforms. So that is just as important, using an area, very close to where we put these platforms. So it's very labor intensive. We haven't done a lot of that, but kind of a really neat trick maybe we could do with kites. And here, see if you can see that one of these things is not like the other. So you can see the top two birds are alive. That middle bird, the bottom real kite, is looking at the decoy like, dude, what's going on? We're sitting in this tree. So this was a big roost site, and we actually got the kites to perch with our decoys. So another way that we could maybe entice birds to be in places that are safe, that we know are going to be there for a long time. So just a quick little social interaction with something that is plastic, but life-like enough. And of course, if they're nesting by each other, they will also roost there at night together, while the nestlings would be in the nest. So typically at night, the female would spend time incubating or brooding on chicks that are up to 2 weeks old. After 2 weeks, they're old enough to like thermoregulate, and the adult may not spend the night with the chicks at night. So they join the neighborhood roost too. So the first thing in the morning, the kites go and they check on their nestlings and go about to get food for them right away, because those chicks will be hungry. The bad thing about a neighborhood nesting area and roosting area is that if a great horned owl, which is the most the kite's biggest predator, if they find a nest, they are more likely to find other swallowtail kite nests too. And so they get that, the owls get the search image, and then they come in and they will actually eat the adult swallowtail kites. So this is a picture of what I've seen underneath a nest tree sometime when a great horned owl gets an adult, and it's usually the female. And we know this because we've put telemetry tracking devices on the birds, and we know that those are the birds that are spending time with the eggs or the chicks at night. So these owls can really do damage to a neighborhood roost. You know, the fact that they're all together, or neighborhood nesting area. So they would go like night by night to each of these nesting kites. And if there's still kites alive before they get to them all, they'll abandon those nests. So obviously the following year, those kites are not going to return, even the ones that are alive, because that was a very traumatic experience. So we have continued to do our telemetry studies, and also just pay attention to how this affects the female breeding birds within a group of swallowtail kites, because that can take a toll on a breeding population. So we do a lot of work with telemetry, as I was mentioning before. So we've tagged birds all throughout the southeastern US to see where they go, from nesting to pre-migratory activities, all the way to South America in the winter, and then find these big communal roost sites, which I'll talk about in a minute. So here's a picture of two different birds we tagged on the Lower Swanee National Wildlife Refuge. And how do we catch a swallowtail kite? Well, you bring in their biggest predator. So here are my two coworkers, Amanda Powell and our owl friend named Trapper, who is no longer with us, but her spirit is. She has helped us tag many swallowtail kites throughout southeastern US. So what Trapper does is sit on a perch that's about 2 feet off the ground. You can see she has her little leash there. So she's tethered to a ring there on the perch, and she jumps up and down on the perch and is in an open area that we put a big mist net. So maybe you went out with Mr. McGinnity and you saw how songbirds are captured in mist nets. It's the same exact thing, but much larger. So we hoisted up about 25 feet, and then the owl's sitting at the base of this perch, and this whole set is near a nesting area. So the swallowtail kites are coming and going to feed their chicks. They spot that owl then they think, oh man, don't eat my chicks. They dive at the owl. We're sitting right there in a blind, so they can't see us. But then they get caught in the net. We run out, grab the kite safely, grab the owl, get the owl out of the way, and then we put a transmitter on it and do some measurements as well. So here's the release of a bird named Sawgrass that was captured in Pinellas County at Sawgrass Lake Park. And this is what we get with our telemetry data. So all these different lines and dots are different birds migrating through peninsular Florida. So what all aspects of kite movement are interesting, but what we've really been excited about is locating these pre-migratory roosts. So you can look at areas where the birds are concentrated. I don't know if you can see this. My cursor is circling here just south of the words Cape Coral. You can see that there's multiple different colors here, and multiple different lines. So that is something that would kind of be of interest. Like many birds are going through there. So could they be using the same communal roost? And so what we look at is closer to the data. We get not only a latitude, longitude, GPS location, but we get date and time. And so we can look at night fixes and say, okay, that bird slept right there. But is there other birds that are in those same areas? And then we've been able to fly in the early mornings before the swallow-tailed kites get up for the day and find these big groups of birds. So we've discovered with our telemetry, and so these were GPS locations from satellite, collected by satellite locations, or now we use GSM, which is actually using the cell phone network to relay the data of the GPS locations. So with that and the birds we've tagged, we've found 3 roosts that are over 1,000 birds at a time. So this picture, if you have a guess in your mind of how many birds are in this picture, I'll tell you in a second. But we've been so lucky to locate these places, and many birds go through here of our tagged birds, but also obviously many more that aren't tagged. So in this picture, we have 900 birds. And we can see over time during the pre-migratory time how many birds are coming and going through here. So we fly over these places to take photos just like this so we can count the individuals over time, and we can get a really good snapshot of the population of the United States, of the US population of swallow-tailed kites in that time frame, because birds from South Carolina, Georgia, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, many of those birds are coming through all of these locations, and they are using these places so they can find food together and get fat for their migration. So I told you about 3 new roosts we found with the transmitters, but with following the data, but we knew of 2 others. So there are at least 5 roosts that are over 1,000 birds, and some of those roosts are almost over 3,000 birds. But then there's smaller ones up to 500 or 300, and we try to fly over these and take pictures and get a really good idea of how many birds are passing through Florida at a time. And then we also collect sighting reports from the public on these same days that we fly, or the same time frame, to see where people are seeing other birds, because not every single swallow-tailed kite is going to find its way each night into one of these roosts. So we've got quite a few swallow-tailed kites out there, And they give us this magical opportunity to keep track of their numbers over time because they use these communal roosts year after year. So that makes them so important for them to stay safe there. So that's a place where they can return and they know where to go. They're safe. They can find each other to then find food that next day. So from above, we got to see these kites foraging over a pasture. And remember, they're feeding on insects at this time to get ready for migration. They've got to put on a ton of weight so they can fly 5,000 miles to get to their winter destination. That's not all in one day, but the start of their migration is going to be over water, crossing the Gulf of Mexico, which can be very tricky, and they need to have that extra support, that extra fat to get them across the Gulf of Mexico. Just like this. So you see about 6 or 7 different colors here. That is the migratory path of swallowtail kites leaving from their nesting locations in Florida and Louisiana. You can see we have a colleague in Louisiana that tagged 2 birds, the purple bird and the red bird. And look how different the path was for both of those birds. They did not come to Florida. Some of them do from Louisiana, but most of those birds are going to go around the Gulf of Mexico, or as you can see, the red bird went straight across the Gulf of Mexico to start its migration. But then you can see once they get to the southern part of the Yucatan into Honduras and Nicaragua, they all join the same path, stay overland, which is much safer, of course, going through Costa Rica and Panama into Colombia, crossing the Andes here, which are very high mountains. They're high, dry, cold, which is not something you see a swallowtail kite in the United States, or even when they're in the wintering areas. So they move through there fast because there's no food. And it's kind of treacherous, right? It's cold and snowy even. So they move through there quite quickly. And then look at where they all end up. I'm going to see if you can follow here. I'll zoom into this area, but it's mostly Brazil, north and south of the Pantanal. The Pantanal is a huge wetland, kind of like the Everglades. It's the size of the Florida Peninsula, essentially. But so it's very similar to the habitat they would find in Florida, but they like the pasture lands that are north and south of that. So let's take a peek. All this red blob is from our tracking data over time in Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay. So we've had our wintering birds spending time in these places. And I just want to point this out. This was 4 different kites that we had tagged, one from Jacksonville, one from Louisiana, one from South Carolina, and one from Miami. And they all found their way to South America, to Brazil, and were like essentially using the same tree at night. So it's just crazy to think of how many birds and what paths they take to get here, and they find each other. They've never seen each other in the United States, and they find each other down here. So that's the socialness that brings them together again. They can find themselves, like, I think it's that black and white pattern makes them hone into each other and use these places. But if you think, so that's 4 birds from South Carolina down through Florida and then Louisiana that are here, but how many other swallowtail kites are there, right? There's got to be a lot more. So they're gathering in big groups down there too. Now I show you this picture, and this, like if I took you up in a plane in Okeechobee County or something, this is a very typical scene, what you would think of what looks like Florida from the air. You got maybe the Kissimmee River, but this is Brazil. This is where they're staying. Big family ranches with cows. Those cows look different than ours, and those palm trees look different than ours. So it is quite there are definitely differences, but they can find insects. There's river systems they can move through, and then big trees they can roost in. So I went down with a friend, and this is the time. This is kind of scary, right? There's a ton of feathers here, but they molted this. This is when swallowtail kites are changing out those big feathers, the tail feathers, the wing feathers. And, at night when they're sitting there, or, in the early morning time, or just when they get there before sleeping, they'll preen, and they lose all these feathers. So it was amazing. We could see, we didn't count all these feathers, but think of how many birds were in these trees before we were there. And we didn't see the kites, so they had moved on. They kind of moved through the landscape throughout the winter. And when I say winter, but it's the austral summer. So that's when, other birds are breeding down in South America. So they're on vacation, essentially, getting new feathers, spending time together, eating and roosting, and then getting ready once again to migrate. So this is also a picture of Brazil, and they eat these giant termites. This is life size. No, just kidding. So at a specific time, you can see those little brown mounds out in the grasses. That's where the termites live. And seasonally, the termites explore. So they have a flighted stage where they go and just emerge. And so the kites are just filling up on these big termites. They pull off the wings. You can see all these little wings fluttering down when they're flying above. But that is a really nice big food source. But like many of our stories, there's always a downside, because even though these birds are finding so much food there, a lot of the places they're hanging out are converting to these giant soy or sugarcane fields. So this is also Brazil. And a lot of those family farms can't afford to stay in cattle and have these essentially, feeding places and roosting places for the kites. And they get bought out by these big companies that use herbicides and pesticides and use monoculture, have zero trees for them to roost in. So the kites have to move. They have to go somewhere else. And if they're on the edges of these places and they happen to get some of these pesticides on the insects they feed on, they could get sick. So this is something we're really concerned about, is the change of habitat in Brazil. And even farther north into the Amazon, the kites cross the Amazon, but they don't stay there. But we are seeing that there's a lot more burning and cutting of the rainforest day after day. And so what the kites do over time is something we're going to be lucky to have that information with all of our tracking data since essentially 1996. We have tracking data for swallowtail kites going all the way to Brazil. So that is also a huge project we want to go into. So I'm going to kind of wrap it up here. We are active a bit through Facebook. I say that because it's just me and it's a very busy time, but I like to keep up on the migration of the swallowtail kites. So we have a Facebook page at this point, and website blogs as well. We would love to see and hear where you are seeing swallowtail kites and some of the other species that we're tracking. And so you can get on our website here. And under the Get Involved tag, you'll also see, or the tab, we have a nest monitoring project called Eyes on Kites. So this is what our website looks like right now. And up here in the top right is the Get Involved tab, and drop down and you'll see Report a Sighting. And then here's the Eyes on Kites page, which you'll also find there. So if you think you are seeing kite nest behavior, I've got a lot of information here. You can sign up for free and help us monitor kites near you. We're a very tiny organization, and we love to have help from people all over the state and beyond when they are seeing swallow-tailed kites, because we learn so much from each place, and we want to make sure those kites where they're nesting are safe. And it'd be great to get you involved if you are interested. These are just a quick summary of some of the other species we are working on right now. I'll start at the top left. We have crested caracaras, short-tailed hawks. This is a light morph. This is a young great white heron in the Keys, magnificent frigatebirds. This is a white morph reddish egret. This guy gives it away with his snail. It's a snail kite. And then white-crowned pigeons, just to name a handful of the species we've been working on recently, which I think Ken Meyer gave you an update on some of those too. I am happy to answer any questions on kites and beyond, and I'm really glad that I got to share my love of these awesome birds with you guys.